Hello, and welcome back to our Learn to Play for Soul 3. Today we're going to be focusing on the unit phase, and we're going to also go over how unit attacks work. This is also going to involve looking at the type chart, and we're going to have a quick go over on that. We're also going to separate out another separate video on the type chart, since it's one of the easiest things to confuse. Just once you get a hang of it, it's fairly easy to use. But just so you know, if you're looking for specifically a type chart, we are going to have a separate video specifically covering that, just so that it's easier to look up. Now, without further ado, we've gone ahead and moved forward from the previous video, and we've switched over to the United Republic side of the table here, and gone partway up through their turn, up to their unit phase. So, here's where we stand. The United Republics moved their ship up and launched a vector unit with Laura Sane, their main character, loaded out with adaptive rangefinder and nuclear torpedo. During their turn, the Deneb player moved their Seeker unit up alongside the Hammerhead. Now, so moving forward into the unit phase. So, units, the way units behave is each unit in the unit phase that you have must activate once per turn. They can only activate once per turn. Each unit must activate in order of move first and then attack. The exception being melee units, where your move is your attack to some extent. We'll go over that later when we're covering attacks. Now, there are three types of movement in Soul 3 for units. Units themselves have a number of moves they can perform. When you're looking at a unit's stat bar here, the lower number here is the number of moves they perform. If a unit is in flight mode, it must perform that number of moves. If a unit is in combat mode, it can perform up to that number of moves. Now, the three types of movement are standard, which you see the little arrow here, agile, which you can see has the circle around an arrow here, and then the last one, which we don't have an example of in gameplay yet, is side slip, but we will go over how a side slip works. So, standard movement, which all units have access to regardless of their icon type, involves performing a 90-degree turn if you like, and moving one forward. So this unit here, this vector, can perform a standard move to go here, here, or here. Now, as I noted, each unit has a number of moves it can perform, and flight mode units specifically must perform their full number of moves. So a vector with a standard move, for instance, could do this, and then turn and go here. Alternatively, it could turn and go here, and then go straight, or do another turn and go here, or even just decide that it doesn't want to deal with that and turn and go this way. So that is standard movement. Again, all units, regardless of their icon type, have access to standard movement. It is the baseline. Then next, you have agile movement. So a unit with the agile movement icon can perform either standard moves or can perform normal moves, or agile moves, sorry. And it can intersperse them any way it likes. Oh, I just noticed that it didn't move enough, so we're going to fix that right now. So that Seeker had moved 2 spaces. So we're going to go ahead and perform its last move for it right now, just to get it up to speed as to where it should be. Since it only taken 2 of its moves last turn. So this is a great way to give an example of an agile movement. So let's put it back where it was before, just to give an example. It had previously performed 2 normal moves. So one to get here, so that was turn first and then move, and another to get here. So now the Seeker decides that it wants to perform an agile move. An agile move is where instead of turning and then moving, you move and then perform a turn. So it could have then gone up here, so it has to move forward first and then turned this way or this direction. So to get it into a position that it wanted to be in, we'll just say, for instance, that it had moved over here to try and get it into a position where it could cut off anything coming up that lane. So to recap, standard move is you turn first and then move straight. So here, turn here, or turn here. Agile move is you move straight, but then you can turn afterwards. What that can result in, so say if you have two moves and have the agile capability, is you can move, do an agile turn, and then perform a normal move to turn again and then move straight, ending in the same space you were in, but facing a different direction. This is the advantage of having agile move. One of the advantages of having an agile move as opposed to a normal move. The other being it gets you into line with a separate unit without having to have moved into that line first, since a normal move requires you to turn first. So say if I'm wanting to target this hammerhead with this vector, I can't do this. It doesn't have the agile move. The vector has to do a standard move first and then perform a normal move, which might put it closer than it wants to be. That being said, let's take a look at the last move first real quick. The last move, of course I don't have an icon to show you, but you'll be able to tell by the difference in icon, is a side slip. Side slip functions differently from agile, whereas agile you can intersperse as many times as you like during your move. A side slip can only be performed as one of your number of moves. So a side slip involves, instead of moving straight, you move to one direction, performing no turn, but simply moving to either side. Side slips are an excellent combination to get you interesting places, particularly if you have a way to add the agile, if you have a way to add agile onto a unit. So for instance, let's say this unit has the agile special rule, which grants it the ability to take agile moves, and then on top of that it has the normal, on top of that it has the side slip special rule, and it takes two moves. So let's say it takes side slip first, and then takes an agile move to get up here. It is now facing back the direction it came, and is a move space up. Now, for instance, let's do side slip with normal. So let's say we're gonna go. So let's say we take a side slip here, and then a normal here. So we're back where we started, but we're now facing a different direction, which a flight mode unit normally cannot attain. Lastly, there is one additional type of standard move that is only available to combat mode units. A combat mode unit that chooses not to perform any moves, so this is if you are not changing spaces at all, may take one 90-degree turn in order to change its direction. That is it. So, to recap, you have your standard move, which is turn first, then move, and it's always one space forward. You have your agile move, which is take that space forward and then turn. And if you have agile, you can intersperse standard and normal. You have your side slip, which is during one of your moves, you may move to either side. And then lastly, if you are a combat mode unit and choose to perform no moves, then you may take a single 90-degree turn and remain in place. And again, combat mode units can move up to their full number of moves, whereas flight mode units must move their full number of moves. So that covers movement. On to combat. So you notice I was talking about units being in line with each other. This matters for specifically flight mode units. So before going into damage and everything and the ranges, which we've already sort of covered, remember how we talked about capital ships only being able to fire in a straight line with their primary weapon and then their secondary weapon being able to fire in any direction. Units have similar restrictions but it is, however, based on what mode they're in. Units in flight mode can only fire in a direct line in front of them, similar to how capital ships can with their primary weapon. However, unlike capital ships, it is not a fixed number. It is based upon what their icon is. So, for a unit to read its attack value, you take the top two sections of that unit's stat bar. The top icon there represents what the top icon represents what the attack style is. So that determines what your effective range can be. The number there determines the amount of damage the attack deals. So let's take a look at the vector, for instance. So it's in combat mode right now, which means it can only attack spaces directly in front of it. Not exactly a happy thing for it right now. On top of that, it has the medium range, which means that it can only attack here and here. So if there was something here or here, it could attack them. However, this is before its move. So, for instance, let's go ahead and move that vector, doing a standard move straight, and then a standard move turn this way. So now that puts it where it can get its medium range out, 1, 2. It can now shoot that hammerhead. And then the damage delta would be 1. Since it is shooting a capital ship, you don't take the unit type into effect. You check the pilot to see if there's any abilities that affect it. There are none. You check any of these to see if there are any abilities that affect it, or if you can take an alternate attack. As we noted before, ordnance attack means that you do have an alternate attack, and since this torpedo icon is not grayed out, if you notice we flip to the other side, you'll notice the torpedo icon is faded. If an icon for an upgrade is faded, that upgrade is not usable on that side. So, in flight mode, it's got the option to use that torpedo upgrade. However, that ordnance attack is artillery range, which means that its minimum range is 3 spaces away. 1, 2, it's the hammerhead, and 3, 3, 3. It is too close to be fired upon with that nuclear torpedo. So, if the vector was going to fire on that hammerhead, which is its only target, since it can't fire at the seeker at this, since it is not directly in front of it and it is in flight mode, that would mean it would deal 1 damage to the capital ship. So we're going to grab a damage marker here and just put that next to the capital or on top of, whichever you prefer. And that shows that it has taken 1 damage so far. Now, how capital damage works. Capitals have an armor value. When they have taken damage equal to their armor value, if there is more damage to be dealt from that attack, they do not take additional damage unless that attack has the Devastate special rule. We can go over Devastate in the future, but essentially what it means is it doesn't prevent that additional damage from being placed. After that additional damage is prevented from being placed, all damage counters are removed from the capital, and 1 damage card from that capital is drawn and placed on that capital. So, for instance, once the hammerhead takes 5 damage, let's say that it has 4 damage and it takes an attack that deals an additional 2 damage. So it only receives 1 of that damage, all damage is discarded, and it draws a card from its capital damage deck. And any effects on that card apply for the remainder of the game. So, for instance, this card drawn here, comms disabled. During the command phase, you generate 1 less command. That then affects the command generation of this capital for the remainder of the game. Now, since that didn't actually deal that damage, we're going to set that back. If a capital ship takes an attack with Devastate, as the hammerhead has Devastate, for instance, that means that the additional damage is dealt, and when pulling damage off a capital ship when it receives a critical damage like that, you only pull damage equal to its armor value. So in that case before, let's say that the damage dealt had the Devastate special rule. So in that case, you would pull off 5, you would deal the full damage, so the capital ship would have 6 damage on it, pull off 5 of that damage and deal a card. Meaning that it would be easier then to deal the next critical damage to that ship. So, having gone over how capital ships take damage, that's the easy part. Now, going back to here. So we looked at how a flight mode unit attacks, which means it can only attack in a straight line. Now we're going to look at, let's just take the vector and put it back here. We're going to instead, as part of a unit's activation before it moves, it can shift. This being the big part of the game, a unit, before it moves, can shift. So that would be performed before you do a move. So, we're going to go ahead and switch out that vector and put in its combat mode piece. And this is what we're actually going to do for the turn is turn that vector to combat mode. So, it doesn't have, is not required to perform a move. So it's just going to take that 90-degree turn and turn this direction. It didn't have to, though. So, combat mode units, unlike flight mode units, have a greater range of area they can attack. Combat mode units can attack any space that... So let's see if we can get a little... can we draw? Yes, we can draw a little here. So, this combat mode unit can attack any of these squares, essentially. Any square that is along the same line as it to either side, and then up forward towards the front of the ship, is within what's called its arc. So, this combat mode unit, this vector turned this way, can attack any of these squares as long as they are within its range, its specific range type. So let's take a look at the vector here. It has this icon here, which means that it has the long range aspect, the long range attack style. So that means it can attack at range 2 to 3. So 0, 1, 2, 0 here, 1, 2, 3. So that means that this Seeker is in range of the vector's attack now. In addition here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The Hammerhead is out of range. Now, a quick note on range. There are two different types of range when determining. This is just for modification reasons. So the actual range is when you look at the board what the actual range is. So this Seeker is at actual range 2. This Hammerhead is at actual range 4 of this vector. If we look at this card here, Adaptive Rangefinder, it says you may adjust the effective range of your attacks up or down by 1. What the effective range is the effective range is you take your actual range first, and then any modifiers, such as Adaptive Rangefinder, for instance, change what the effective range actually is. Your effective range is what you plug into here to see if you are in range. So this vector could perform an attack on the Hammerhead if it wants to. So how that works is you take the actual range of 4, then you use Adaptive Rangefinder. So your effective range starts at 4, you adjust the effective range down by 1 to 3. Now you check it against your range type of long. 2 to 3, you are now within effective range. And that's how effective range works. So, now that we've gone over the difference between actual and effective range, now comes the big part. Unit versus unit attacks. So, we've got the vector here attacking the Seeker here. The effective range doesn't matter, so we're not going to need to use Adaptive Rangefinder because it is within the long range capability of the vector. So taking a quick look here at what that means the vector has a damage value on its attack of 2. So, let's take a quick look over here. The type chart. Different types give different bonuses based on advantage or lack of advantage. So, let's take a look at what we've got here. The middle icon on a unit's stat bar is what type that particular unit is. The lower icon on a pilot's icon bar is what type of pilot that pilot is. When you're determining a unit's type for advantage or disadvantage, you use both the pilot's and the unit's types. If the pilot's a hidden pilot, like we discussed in the previous video, then you only use the unit's type. So in this particular example, we have the synergy type and the lone wolf type. We're going to go, tank type. So upper left is tank, upper right is lone wolf, lower right is swarm, lower left is synergy. So in this particular case, you have these two types here, which that unit is. So you have a tank and synergy type. What you'll notice is each different type has a little arrow going into another type. What that arrow means is it has advantage against that type. An advantage against a type means that you deal an additional damage to it. So from a base standpoint, synergy deals an additional damage to tank, which deals an additional synergy deals an additional damage to tank, which deals an additional damage to lone wolf, which deals an additional damage finally to swarm, and then which deals an additional damage into synergy. When you are looking at a combined type for a pilot and a unit, anything that deals into its own type, so for instance we've got tank and synergy here, is canceled out. Essentially you are getting rid of your advantage in order to get rid of a weakness. So how this particular type works is it is strong against lone wolf because that's where it has an advantage. However, it still has a weakness to swarm types. So we're going to look over here at what typing Elias Stone's fighter is. So he is also synergy type, but he's also swarm type. So let's take a look at the type chart again. So that means that he's this lower half here. So that means that he is strong against tank types, but weak to lone wolf types. That means in this particular case, this attack here against this Seeker does not deal additional damage because it does not have a weakness against tank types specifically. Going the other way, if that Seeker were to attack the Vector, it would also not deal additional damage because its strength is against tank types. And while Laura Sane in this Vector here does have the tank type, it doesn't have the weakness from the tank type due to having the synergy type's advantage to plug into that. So all this gets a little bit confusing. Again, we're going to have a separate video going specifically in depth on this subject. But let's break down just kind of how the types work. When dealing additional damage, you only are concerned with the actual attacker. You're not concerned with how many advantages the defender has, only with the advantages of the attacker. There are essentially, when it comes to type combinations, 3 different subtypes of combinations. 4 different subtypes of combinations, 2 of which are very similar. So there are the subtypes of the vertical combinations, where you have, so like we had before, the tank and synergy. These are both weak to each other. If you have a match of each other on the board, any attacks either of them deal to each other will deal an additional damage. Then you have the opposites of the horizontal types. Neither of these are weak to vertical types. They are, again, however, weak to each other. Then you have split types. Split types are where you have, say, lone wolf and synergy, or tank and swarm. Split types are an odd bunch because they don't cover any of their, due to the fact that they do not cover any of their weaknesses. This gives them some interesting advantages and disadvantages. First off, their advantage is that they get 2 different strengths. A split type of synergy and lone wolf, for instance, against any of the horizontal types has a advantage dealing an additional damage. Whether it's against the top, if it's against the top, then the synergy advantage plugs into the tank if it's against the bottom. Then the Lone Wolf advantage plugs into the Swarm. And then conversely with the other split type, it does that with vertical. So the Swarm advantage plugs into the Synergy weakness, and the tank advantage plugs into the Lone Wolf weakness. So perfect types are where it's all one type. Against a perfect type, split type can still deal an additional damage. However, that perfect type, if it's one that a split type has an advantage against, also has an advantage against that split type because of the way they are set up. Lastly, in terms of split types, before we go further into perfect types, split types are strong against their inverse. So a Synergy Lone Wolf here is strong against a tank and Swarm here. So they're strong against split types of the opposite type are strong against each other, just as with vertical and horizontal combinations. However, since they each are plugging in 2 of the advantages, split types of opposite types deal an additional 2 damage when attacking each other. Thus, is the risk of using a split type is that they can take heavy additional damage if they're counterplayed and aren't protected very well. Lastly, perfect types. Perfect types are where both the units type and the pilot's type are the same type. So, unlike most combined typings, they do not gain any additional type. So that means they are very easy to counter in terms of someone playing a unit with a specific pilot in order to deal with a perfect type. The advantage of a perfect type, however, is because they have 2 of the same advantage. That perfect type, if it is dealing its advantage into a weakness, deals an additional 2 damage. So thus is the advantage and disadvantage of perfect types. The disadvantage being they are inherently easy to predict and easy to counter, and the fact that they can't take additional damage other than from other perfect types, beyond just the one. And secondly, they have the capacity to deal 2 damage, and unlike a split type, it's a little harder to get away from that. So that is how the combined types work out. Again, you have vertical types, which are strong to each other, horizontal types that are strong to each other, and neither of them can gain additional damage to each other. Split types, which are weird and and have interesting double-edged sword capabilities, and perfect types, which are predictable but also very strong. So again, in this particular situation, you have a horizontal type and a vertical type, meaning no additional damage is dealt when either of them attacks the other. So let's go ahead and resolve that attack. So we have a vector firing a long-range weapon. 1, 2, we are in range. That deals 2 damage to that Seeker. So that Seeker will receive 2 damage. A Seeker has 5 hit points, making it decently durable, but not quite heavily durable. This particular Seeker, due to Elias Stone's abilities, has Resilient +1, which does mean that it increases its HP value to 6. So that means this particular Seeker needs to take 4 additional damage in order to be defeated. And there we go. I know that's a lot to take in. Again, the ship phase and unit phase are the most important phases of the game, so they do have a lot going for them, but that covers the entirety of the unit phase. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments below, or join our Discord server and ask there. We are more than happy to clear things up for you. And other than that, we will see you folks in the next video where we will go over the end phase, and more specifically, we will then go over how victory points work, which is how you win the game. Until then, we will see you next time.